Hey, we're here with Turn the Page podcast. Let's get this thing rolling. Today, the conversation is about intentionality. But the thing is, I want to let you know up front, intentionality is the solution. Intentionality is the solution. That's the name of this podcast. And I need to let you know that intentionality is a solution to a problem you might not even know that you have. Yeah, intentionality is a solution to a problem you might not even know what you have. So that's what we're going to talk about today on this show. So let's jump into it. And I'm going to let you know how today is going to go. I'm going to give you 3 points, and what I mean, 3 things that let you know that there's a problem. And then I'm going to talk about how intentionality is a solution to these problems. All right, these issues or roadblocks. Okay. Number 1. First thing I want to talk about is this thing called priming, right? Priming. What is priming, you ask? What is priming? You know, it's something you do beforehand. Something you do beforehand. We're talking about priming, and as it relates to a human being, an individual, think of it as your programming, the way your mind is programmed to operate. See, we have to remember our brains are likened to a computer. Our brains are similar to a computer in the sense that it can be programmed, it can be taught how to do things. You can think of, in the same sphere of influence, a question I ask often: what's the difference between influence, manipulation, and leadership? Because all 3 are geared at change of behavior. Right? When we're talking about priming, we're talking about the ability to influence decisions. So when you're priming someone, when someone is being primed, it's a set of things that you expose a person to. And if you expose them to these things enough, in the future, they're more than likely going to make this particular decision. All right? So priming talks about if you expose a person to a certain thing long enough or at the right time prior to a specific decision, you can influence the decision that they're going to make. Or another way to look at it, you can with a good amount of accuracy predict the choice that this individual is going to make based off the priming that they have. And that's why we talk about priming being programming, because if something is programmed to operate a certain way, you can predict that it's going to respond this way, right? You're priming, you're programming. Well, you don't know what you're primed to do. So what do I mean by this? You're consistently making choices all throughout the day. Sometimes they're small choices we don't, think about, but sometimes they're big, important choices, and it's called Turning the Page podcast, talking about turning the page in your life, turning the page in a particular situation. When you reach moments to where you have to make decisions that's going to impact you turning the page, right? When you make decisions along those lines, you can almost to an accurate guess what choices you're going to make based off your what? Your priming, based off your programming. Now, when we talk about priming, it's just the specific things that you've been exposed to. So what is your priming? We're talking about, what are you exposing yourself to? What are you listening to on a regular basis? What are you watching? What are your senses soaking up? What is your normal reaction to the smells that you smell, the conversations that you hear? Those are large scales and some of the more important ones, but even more so, getting deeper, conversations. What conversations are you exposed to on a regular basis? What conversations are you exposed to on a regular basis in the different areas of your life? What are the consistent conversations around relationships, or around careers, or around family, or around finances, or around people? What are these consistent conversations that you're hearing? What is the consistent conversation you hear about advancing in life and progressing? What are these consistent conversations you hear about change in life, stretching yourself, reaching for something new? What are these conversations you hear about greatness and excellence, right? Whatever you're constantly hearing, that's priming you. That's programming you. These things. What is your consistent conversations you're hearing about yourself? What are you being programmed to think about yourself? This is your priming, your programming. And based on these things that you're exposed to, they're going to accurately predict the choices that you're about to make, or they're a great influence, on the choices that you're about to make. And the thing is, we don't even know that we're being primed on a regular basis. We're just going through our lives, going day to day, just doing the things that we're doing, not realizing that everything we're doing is becoming a form of our priming, a form of our programming. So when we reach those moments, there's kind of a understanding of what it is that we're going to do, how it is that you're going to respond to said thing based on the priming and programming that's been instilled in you, right? So when I say a problem, remember, intentionality is the solution. Without me even digging into it, I bet your mind can already understand how intentionality is the solution to priming. Because right now, you're just being primed. You're just being primed. You're being primed. You don't even know what you're being primed for, but you're being primed. So what you got to, take some inventory. And I really love the idea of segmenting your life so you can really, look into specifics of your life. If we segment our life to these different areas, what have you been primed to think about in each of these areas? The music you listen to, the TV you watch, in short, the conversations that you're exposed to on said subject. And then where the conversation is coming from. What's the validity of the person speaking the conversation? All these things are important. But yeah, I don't want to get too far ahead. But we understand the priming. What are you being primed for? You're being primed for something. You don't even know it. On another note, the people priming you know it. They know, they have full on they know exactly what they're doing. They're being very intentional. It's a science to them. The marketing science, the big data analytics, from the colors that they use to the words they use to all of those things is priming, influence. It's all there, right? And this is going to roll into the next point of the problem that you didn't know that you had, that intentionality is the solution to. Priming rolls into point number 2. We're talking about subconscious mind. Are you aware that your subconscious mind studies point out that your subconscious mind is responsible for 95% of the choices that you make? And when we talk about subconscious mind, that's below your consciousness. Your consciousness is what you're actively thinking of. Your subconscious is what's running on autopilot. Most of the things we do are based on autopilot decisions. So most of what we do happens in the subconscious level. And earlier we talked about the priming. That's why that priming becomes so important, because that priming is going to greatly influence that subconscious level of you. Your subconscious is primed to perform a certain way. And if you understand that 95% of the choices that we're making, not even about to dig into all the choices we make. 95% of the choices we make are just subconscious choices, mostly thoughtless action, somewhat instinct in some degree. But that's most of our decision making right there. And if most of our decision making, 95% of it comes from the subconscious, and that subconscious is greatly affected by the priming, one would think that, I should pay more attention to what I'm being primed. That's intentionality is the solution to a problem you didn't know you had, right? So Intentionality is the solution to a problem you didn't know that you had. So we have this going on, that the priming and impacting our subconscious mind, those consistent conversations is impacting is changing those things there as well. Now, that's point number one, priming. Point number two, the subconscious mind. And I know I could do we do endless conversations about the depths of the subconscious mind and how it impacts us, and how we relate to it. That's not the main subject of the day. Just the key point: the subconscious mind makes 95% of the choices that we make, related to the first point, and is greatly influenced by the priming. That's the reality of it. Is all priming really goes to that subconscious area, right? Point number three: the odds are stacked against you. What do I mean when I say the odds are stacked against you? The older you get, the way your brain operates, right? Neurons sending pathways from this, just signals going across. That's the communication in your brain. In between this communication, paths are forged. And without using actual scientific terms for these things, in short, as you get older, the ability for your neurons to create new paths, it's just harder. It deals along the lines of neural flexibility, neuroplasticity. It just becomes harder as you get older. The odds are stacked against you. Your brain doesn't want you to change. There's comfortability and familiarity. There's safety in familiarity. Remember, the lizard brain, we still have the inner workings. Most of us, especially Americans, we may live in this, so many places, not a third world, live in a civilized place. And they're not actively running away from lions and predators and things like that. But we still have something in us that remembers that. So it's kind of like, if there's familiarity, there's safety. If something is consistently the same, we get a routine, a pattern locked in, you know what to expect. That alleviates the danger. Our inner workings like that. That's why our inner workings like that. So it behooves our natural instincts to cling to familiarity, because if we thrust ourselves into change, that could be danger. You have a path, and think pre-civilization, there's a path you take to get to the water. Every time you take that path, you know it's going to come. Going a different way breeds a lot of danger. So your biology wants you to go down that same familiar road. The odds are stacked against you. On an inner basic level, our inward being kind of wants to stay the same. But intentionality is the solution, right? So basically, I'm describing, we're talking about, when I ask that question, what's the difference between influence, manipulation, and leadership? Yes, there's some difference in them, but they all float along the lines of creating changed behavior, influencing decisions. Now, I want to talk about why intentionality is the solution. Because if we have these things going on that's impacting, influencing our decision making, why not let us take some control over it? Why not you take back control of your programming, of your priming? Why not you have full on control on why you think the way that you think? Instead of letting some person or some group or some set of people with their own agenda influence your way of thinking, you can take full on advantage of yourself, right? And that's why intentionality is a solution. And that's how we're going to talk about it, right? So one of the first things that intentionality is going to do for you Intentionality directs what you consume. Intentionality directs what you consume. We need to know that because if I'm intentional about what I'm consuming. Okay, so an easy way to think of it is a person dieting or wanting to either lose weight or wanting to put on muscle, wanting to gain weight. There's a specific diet that gets those goals accomplished. And when a person is specifically trying to accomplish this goal, they're very intentional about what they eat. They're very intentional about what they consume. That intentionality directs their consumption. You get some intentionality, it's going to direct your consumption. Consumption of what? What are the consistent conversations? Going back to that point again. The consistent conversations. See, consistent conversations, there's words that come up out of you and there's words that come back to you. Now, the control that you have over the words of this exchange of words, this conversation, one, you can control the words that come out of you, and you can control which words you choose to come into you. And even more so than just come into you, which words you hear. Because that's part of the conversation. Don't think when I say consistent conversation, I'm just talking about something that you're engaged in. I'm literally talking about anything that you hear and anything that comes up out of you. Consistent conversation. If I'm intentional, I get to be intentional about what I'm going to hear. I get to be intentional about what I'm going to consume because I'm aiming for something. A hidden theme in this is goal setting, but I'm aiming for something. As a pause, y'all get this one for free. Sometimes goal setting is difficult because you don't know what you want. But sometimes you have to go a little deeper with your goal setting. One of the times that I was going through a situation trying to get my life back on track and I was consistently making bad choices, I didn't set a goal of like, okay, I'm not getting in trouble to do this. My goal was just to make my mama proud. I wasn't like, oh, I'm going to set a goal to graduate. I'm going to set a goal to get this GPA. I'm going to set a goal to get this job. No, those weren't my goals. My goal was to make my mama proud because your goals direct your decision. I set a goal. Now I set a goal. I want to be intentional about accomplishing the goal. So I'm going to be intentional about what it is that I do because I'm going to do things that's going to get me to that goal, which means I'm going to be intentional about what I consume because what I consume is going to impact the route that I go, which impacts me accomplishing that goal. So intentionality directs what you consume. And again, remember we talked about the problem of priming. What I'm consuming is priming me. So the moment that I'm intentional about what I'm consuming, I'm intentional about how I'm being primed. Why is that important? When you're needing to turn the page in your life, turn the page on that situation, sometimes you might have to take a risk. Sometimes you might have to make a sacrifice. Sometimes you might have to get a little bit dirty, right? How do you normally feel about those things? It's not, for the normal person, that's not something that they run into. How do you feel about uncertainty? That's not something that a lot of people want to run into. How do you feel about uncomfortability? We love to say comfort can't progress, but how do you feel about being uncomfortable in situations judged by your willingness to get uncomfortable, right? It's kind of low for most of us. We don't naturally want to do that. But intentionality reverses that. Intentionality is going to direct what I consume because I'm trying to accomplish something. And I know that what I'm consuming is priming me to make choices in the future. When I have to take these risks, when I have to, make change, when I have to make sacrifice, how do I normally feel about these? It might be a bad place, but I'm intentional about what I'm consuming. I'm intentional about what I'm being primed. Now I might be built up to do this. Imagine you about to have to make a choice that's going to be a big risk in your life. But prior to you meeting that moment, you hear someone talk about next level. You just hear someone talk about, hey, we got to go to the next level. We got to go to the next level. And you hear somebody talking about going to the next level for a year. Now imagine how your psyche is going to think when you get to that moment where you got to make a risk that could potentially take you to the next level. You now have a mind that's primed on getting to the next level. Now you're more willing to take that risk versus if you hadn't been hearing that message, you might be less inclined to make that choice because of how you were primed. But now that I have a goal set, now that I'm being intentional about what I'm consuming, is intentional about how I'm being primed. I'm going to prime myself for greatness. I'm going to prime myself for overcoming. I'm going to prime myself for positivity. I'm going to prime myself to make the tough choices, right? I'm going to be intentional about what I consume. To make it practical, what are you reading? What Audible books are you downloading? I know there's more than audible.com, but what books are you consuming? Who are you, like a person that you talk to? What person do you talk to the most? What person do you listen to the most? What music do you listen to the most? What are you watching on TV? These are all you're hearing. How much? How much are you hearing from people wiser than you? How much are you hearing uplifting things and motivating things? All of these play a portion. They're part of your priming. But I'm intentional about what I'm consuming, so I'm intentional about how I'm being primed. I'm going to intentionally prime myself into more positive things just by lending my ear to it more often. Intentionality is the solution. I do that, now I'm going to be better primed. So when I'm in positions where I have to start making those choices that's going to greatly impact my life, I'm pre-primed to make the good decision, part of that decision-making process. Intentionality is the solution, all right? Number two thing, all right? So we talked about intentionality, directing what you consume. Number two, and this kind of rolls into it as well, intentionality directs the regularly scheduled program. Intentionality disrupts the regularly scheduled program. I think I said direct first, but I meant disrupts, as you can see on the screen. Intentionality disrupts the regularly scheduled program. You'll remember you've been primed for so long, you're programmed to perform a certain way. Intentionality disrupts that program. We talked about the subconscious. Intentionality disrupts the subconscious, or rather, it changes it. Hey, I'm going to be intentional about this 95% of me that's making choices. So this intentionality is going to disrupt this 95% decision maker, because that's already programmed for something. I'm going to be intentional about what I'm programmed to do. I'm going to be intentional about how my mind naturally is inclined to work. I'm going to be intentional about these things because I'm trying to get something done. You're trying to go somewhere. You're trying to accomplish something. You're trying to reach for better. You're trying to be that man or that woman that's going to break chains for your family. You ain't got time to be playing around. You got to be intentional. You don't have time to just let life happen. You got to be intentional. You don't have time to just go with the flow of the river of life. No, you are salmon or bass, whichever one, the salmon, trying to jump back upstream because you got somewhere to be. That's intentionality. It's going to disrupt that program. So I need to recalibrate this 95%. Because this 95% of my subconscious mind that's making these decisions, it has to be recalibrated so that I start making choices that's going to get me to where I'm trying to be. Whether that's a physical or metaphysical place, I'm going to put some intentionality to disrupt this regular programming so that I'm just naturally inclined to make better choices. That comes with intentionality. I'm not just going to lend my ear to anything. I'm not just going to let myself be programmed anyway. I'm going to be intentional about it. I'm intentional about what I read. I'm intentional about what I listen to. I'm intentional about the conversations I stay in. I'm intentional about the actual physical places I am, because where I am is going to impact what it is I'm hearing. because the conversations are where the conversations are. It's where you're going. You know, they're pulling this over here, they're pulling that over there. My hands are straight. They're pouring something here, they're pouring something there. What they're pouring is what they're pouring. Am I drinking from here or am I drinking from here? It's your choice of what you receive. But I'm going to start being intentional. I'm going to be intentional. You know what? I want to be filled with this, so I'm going to be intentional about coming over here. Intentionality is going to disrupt that programming. And the last thing we're talking about, intentionality is the solution. Intentionality provides purpose and direction to our actions and our thoughts. Oh man, my nose be itching. Intentionality provides direction and purpose to our actions and our thoughts. Okay. Now, remember earlier when I told you that the odds are stacked against you in making these choices? What intentionality is going to do is going to provide purpose and direction to our actions and our thoughts. The odds are stacked against us to make these choices. So we need some purpose and direction in these choices. We need the purpose, we need the direction. We need to be set to go in another way. We have to intentionally fight against these things. Because normally our body, our brain, our psyche doesn't want that change. It doesn't want it. We got to be purposeful in that direction that we're going. We got to be purposeful in the actions that we're making. We got to be purposeful in the thoughts that we're having. Basically saying the same thing over and over again. We got to be purposeful about those actions and purposeful about those thoughts. Intentionality is what's going to provide that to us. It's hard for our brain to want to make that choice. I'm going to have to be intentional. It's like brute force. I'm intentional, so I'm directing myself. Intentionality, and I probably shouldn't have made this, no, intentionality are choices that's made in the conscious level. Intentionality removes it from the fruit. Intentionality removes the decision making from the subconscious realm to the conscious realm. It is switching where that's being made. And if I do that switching long enough, what's done in the conscious eventually creeps into the subconscious and becomes the default program. And that's only going to be accomplished, through the purposeful and directive actions and thoughts. Like, even when you're thinking on something you don't want to think about, you can be intentional on thinking about this. I was in class this morning and I was trying to prove a point to the teenagers about how our thoughts impact our emotions. So I made a statement about an individual that you don't like. Like, I didn't mention them, I just made a statement about it, and I watched people start tensing up. And then the young lady was having a hard time to stop thinking about it. So I was like, who is God to you? What has God done? What do you think about God? And by question number 2, she was smiling and whatnot. I said, hey, how do you feel now? She's like, oh, I feel better, right? Intentionally changing your thoughts. Hey, I'm thinking about this. You know what? Let me say something out loud that's going to audibly redirect my focus. That happens with, what's the magic word? Intentionality. Intentionality is the solution. Intentionality is the solution to a problem you didn't know you have. I want to recap just a quick summary. Intentionality is the solution. We have the problem of priming. That priming, just what we're programmed to do, comes down to our subconscious mind and how the odds are stacked against us. Our brain doesn't want change, but intentionality is the solution because it's going to direct what we consume, which is going to, fight back against the programming and priming. It disrupts the regularly scheduled programming, as we talked about, and it provides purpose and directions to our actions and thoughts, which again is everything we're talking about, right? So, yeah, you got to get you some intentionality. The purpose of this was I need you to be more intentional. A host of benefits in it. I am Kenneth Page. Check us out on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok. Follow us, shout us out, talk to us, let us know how we're helping and blessing you. Hey, this has been a great episode of Turn the Page podcast. Get some intentionality in your life. If there's one thing that you're going to do different, is you are going to get some intentionality in your life. You understand the power of intentionality, and you're going to get it in your life. Intentionality is for you. Signing out.